What is up guys, my name is Chase, and Nintendo has released a few collection of games before. We've had Super Mario All-Stars and Super Mario 3D All-Stars. They also released the Metroid Prime trilogy on the Nintendo Wii, and more recently Nintendo released Pikmin 1 and 2 on the Nintendo Switch. So that got me thinking, what other collection games could Nintendo release? Well, today we're going to be talking about some of the collection games that I would love to see Nintendo bring to the Switch. First off, a collection that I think would be perfect for Nintendo Switch is the Mario and Luigi collection. Mario and Luigi was a video game series of RPGs made specifically for Nintendo handhelds. It started out with Mario and Luigi Superstar Saga on the Game Boy Advance in 2003, and technically ended with Paper Jam on the Nintendo 3DS in 2015, as well as remakes of the first and third game, which we don't really talk about anymore. Anyway, I think a collection of the first three Mario and Luigi games, Superstar Saga, Partners in Time, and Bowser's Inside Story would make for a really great collection on the Switch. I think this would be the definitive trilogy of Mario and Luigi games that most people would want. Also, Dream Team relied heavily on the dual screen function on the 3DS, with players controlling Luigi on the bottom screen and affecting the gameplay on the top screen, which I think would be too much to try to bring over to the Switch. Meanwhile, with the first three games, Superstar Saga was a Game Boy Advance game, so they don't even have to worry about the dual screen functions. And in general, I think Partners in Time and Bowser's Inside Story, they didn't rely as heavily on the dual screens as maybe Dream Team did. So I think some way, somehow, Nintendo can figure out a way to either incorporate a dual screen type of experience, or maybe just eliminate the dual screens altogether. And hey, like we mentioned earlier, they technically did already remake two of these three games, Superstar Saga and Bowser's Inside Story, so maybe they could even just port those versions onto the Switch, and at least all that there is to update is Partners in Time. Plus, since people don't seem to be happy with the current state of the Paper Mario RPGs, personally I thought the Origami King was actually okay, but to each their own. At least if they bring over the Mario and Luigi series, the Super Mario Bros. Fans and the RPG fans can have a collection of classic games to play that we already know are quality games. And even though the developer of the Mario and Luigi games, Alpha Dream, has gone out of business, Nintendo still does own the rights to Mario and Luigi, so hey, I still think it would be totally possible. Next up, let's move on to everybody's favorite ape. I would love to see the Donkey Kong Country collection. The Donkey Kong Country series is a very interesting series for me personally. I was always more of a fan of just the classic 2D Mario games, but Donkey Kong Country, while still being a 2D side-scroller, I think offered so many more complex ideas and oftentimes would make for a more difficult game. So I guess in some ways the Donkey Kong Country series is like the grown-up version of the 2D Mario games. Anyway, back in 2018, Nintendo actually brought over a Donkey Kong Country game to the Switch, Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze, which was originally released on the Wii U. And hey, at least that gives us hope that Nintendo isn't completely ruling out Donkey Kong Country as a series, which means that I think it would be totally cool if Nintendo brought over the three classic Donkey Kong Country games: Donkey Kong Country 2 Diddy Kong's Quest, and Donkey Kong Country 3 Dixie Kong's Double Trouble. I think it would be really cool if Nintendo remade these old Donkey Kong Country games and brought them to the Switch with graphics more like Donkey Kong Country Returns on the Wii. I mean, it would be awesome if they could do Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze style graphics, but honestly, I'll just take what we can get. Since these are three older Super Nintendo games that, for the most part, I feel like especially with 2 and 3, they don't really get talked about as much as, say, Super Mario World on the Super Nintendo. By giving them a facelift and bringing them over to the Switch, it would introduce these games to a whole new generation of gamers, and plus with these games supporting 2-player co-op, it could make for a perfect game in which each player uses a single Joy-Con. And as a bonus, I mean, there are 3 classic Donkey Kong Country games, a perfect number of games to be included in one of these collection games. And finally, since there have been rumors about this Legend of Zelda Wind Waker and Twilight Princess HD collection coming out for Nintendo Switch, I thought it would be a really cool idea to see the Legend of Zelda 2D collection, or alternatively, the Legend of Zelda All-Stars. The Zelda series is in a very interesting spot right now, where the 3D Zeldas have pretty much completely taken over the 2D ones. Obviously, Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom have been massive hits on the Nintendo Switch, but besides that, we haven't really gotten our fill of 2D Zelda games in a hot minute. We had the Link's Awakening remake a few years ago, and that's it. Not to undermine Link's Awakening because I absolutely love the style of that game, but frankly, we have 3 mainline 3D Zelda games on the Switch, and only 1 2D mainline Zelda game on the Switch. And those ratios get even worse if you include the Hyrule Warriors games. And I don't know, I'm just completely speculating here, like I'm not a developer by any means, but ideally, some of these 2D Zelda games are old enough to where I feel like remaking them and putting them into a collection would honestly be simple enough where it's like, why not do it? But once again, that's just coming from me, some random guy sitting on the couch. Anyway, the 3 2D Zelda games that I picked out for this collection are The Legend of Zelda Nintendo Entertainment System, The Legend of Zelda A Link to the Past from the Super Nintendo, and The Legend of Zelda A Link Between Worlds from the Nintendo 3DS. And I mean, A Link Between Worlds is kind of iffy just because we now know that they are releasing standalone 3DS games with Luigi's Mansion Dark Moon coming out next year. But anyway, I think it would be great for Nintendo to remake the original The Legend of Zelda game. With how old that game is and how sort of cryptic it is looking back at it now, I would absolutely love to see a reimagined Legend of Zelda game where it sort of lives up to today's standards and it doesn't really feel like an NES game where you have to constantly check manuals or look up walkthroughs and whatnot. And as a newer The Legend of Zelda fan, I have been absolutely terrified to ever go back to any of the original NES Zelda games. They just seem like it's gonna be ridiculously difficult to try to play blindly by myself. Then with A Link to the Past, I think that's just a beloved 2D Zelda game. In my opinion, I think A Link to the Past really laid the groundwork for all future Zelda games. I just really love how the world of Hyrule was laid out in A Link to the Past. It was super interesting to explore Hyrule in a 2D environment, especially since I started with the 3D ones. And it's just a really great game. I think the 2D Zelda games in general offer a completely different experience of Zelda gameplay than the 3D games. And with A Link Between Worlds, once again very similarly to A Link to the Past, that's just a very different and still incredibly fun way to experience The Legend of Zelda. When I played through A Link Between Worlds after A Link to the Past, it felt incredibly familiar while still incorporating a bunch of fresh new gameplay mechanics. And if I'm not mistaken, for the most part, A Link Between Worlds didn't even rely too heavily on the bottom screen. I believe most of the bottom screen was just used for inventory management, which I mean nowadays we are just used to opening menus to manage our inventories and weapons and whatnot. So I think these 3 The Legend of Zelda games would make for an incredible collection of 2D games that really complements the 3D Zelda games that we already have on the Switch. So those were 3 collection games that I would absolutely love to see Nintendo make for the Switch. I think collection games are really cool because they allow these video game developers to continue making their games relevant and not letting the games die off with old generations. It also introduces these classic games to newer generations who may have not played them before. So let me know in the comments what collection games would you like to see Nintendo make for the Switch. If you want to see another one of my Nintendo Switch videos, feel free to check out the one below. For now, thank you so much for watching. My name is Chase and I will see you guys again soon. Bye!